I mean, you have a bit of a hard time feeling sorry for this guy, like 11.9 million pounds you could live
Oh,
on.
the poor guy, the poor landlord with 800 properties.
Yeah.
My heart bleeds for him.
Yeah.
But, like, is he okay? Hello and welcome to The Big Con, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and simplifying the world of strategy, exploring its impact on businesses and individuals who've either harnessed it for success or perhaps missed the mark. My name is Dale Zinski. I'm a big business nerd and a content aficionado. And
I'm Emily, a Harvard degree candidate.
we are bringing you in on The Con. We're sharing the valuable lessons from both the failures and the triumphs of those who've come before us. Now, Emily, we have a case study episode today, one of our personal favourites, the good old content. Who are we looking at today?
Okay, Dale. So today I actually have a success story for you.
Ooh, that was the promise. We're going to look at the good ones and the bad ones.
Yes, this is a real fighter story. The odds are against you and you're getting all the no's story. I would call them underdogs, but one of the founders went to school at Harvard, so, you know. But anyway,
Underdog-ish.
underdog-ish. Anyway, today I'm telling you all about Airbnb. So it's a household name, quite literally.
See what you did there. That was clever.
There are three parts to our story today. Their struggles with getting off the ground, the curveball that they had to meet, and then what they're facing now sort of as part of their growth and establishing themselves into global communities. So let's go back to the very beginning. It all started because two roommates, Joe Jebbia and Brian Chesky, decided to get 3 air mattresses and rent out their room. Their first three clients paid $80 in rent each. And with $240 in their hand after one night, they were like, hey, we might be onto something here.
I note there wasn't like a additional $80 cleaning fee that I need to pay as well.
No,
Is this
not at
common
this time.
apparently? Good. Comes later.
Once they sort of think, okay, I've got an idea, they then approach who's now their third founder, Nathan Blechazik, to build a website, and they launched in 2008, but nobody noticed.
Oh,
So then they tried again, and they tried to pitch at South by Southwest. But they walked away with only 2 customers from that, and one of the customers was Chesky, one of the founders. So it was pretty bleak. But they persisted. They continued on the road to raising funds, but it was a tough one. They were rejected by more than 15 investors, and no buzz was building. So then they had an interesting idea for a marketing campaign at this point. They created limited edition cereals for the 2008 presidential election, and they called them Obama O's and Captain McCain's.
lateral thinking.
Yes.
I like it. It's what you get from Silicon Valley and the kind of tech startup world, something outside the box.
Right.
Cereal box, as it were.
Exactly. So they put information packs about Airbnb into the boxes. They sold 800 boxes at $40 each, which generated over $30,000. So that's great. Even with this little bit, they still couldn't break past $200 a day in income on the business. Then in 2009, they got invited to something called Y Combinator, which is basically like 3 months training for startups that got a little bit of get up and go.
Can we drill in on Y Combinator?
Yeah.
It's effectively a startup accelerator.
Yeah.
So it's a 3-month program, and you also get a decent amount of capital.
So, they got $20,000.
Whatever they put through that, they'll actually get some money for it at the end.
Yeah.
And lots of companies have come out of Y Combinator.
Yeah.
Reddit, from my understanding, but a huge list have gone through Y Combinator.
They were lucky enough to go there, and like you said, they got $20,000. That's not really what turned them around, according to them. What really turned them around sort of happened in the training sort of aspect. And I think I'll use a quote from one of the founders, Joe Jebbia, to describe it, because it really captures the turnaround in their minds. So he said, "We had this Silicon Valley mentality that you had to solve problems in a scalable way, because that's the beauty of code, right? You can write one line of code that can solve a problem for one customer, 10,000 or 10 million. And he says that Y Combinator was the first time someone gave us permission to do things that don't scale, and it changed the trajectory of the business. So what does things that don't scale, what does that mean to you, Dale?
Well, plot twist. I know the exact quote that the founder of Y Combinator, Paul Graham, actually gave to the boys.
Oh.
That made them think along this.
Is this you doing your cheeky research?
A little bit, but also this is one of those really lovely Silicon Valley myths that kind of prevail across the industry. And Paul Graham, very, very, very successful man, probably needs to attribute his thinking to someone else. But he pretty much said to them, instead of finding 1 million people who like you. Find 100 people who absolutely love you.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of goes back to an entirely different mindset from Kevin Kelly, who has his 1,000 true fans proposal, where it's instead of just creating something that's a little bit, hey, going and you might sell some, if you are able to sell or find a product or an idea, or if you're an artist who's finding something, if you have 1,000 people who are incredibly dedicated and they're giving you $100 a year, for instance, that's a cheeky $100,000 in your pocket.
Yeah.
I think that mentality of changing from scale later, obviously Airbnb did scale, but focusing on your eternal product for a little bit and finding a really beautiful thing that they're doing, whether that's in the design, the product offering, whatever it might be, and having the permission to do that. And I guess the $20,000 is a bit of runway to also do that, might kind of help that thinking.
Yeah,
and
but
then
I
maybe
mean,
you scale later.
$20,000 won't really go that far if you're spending it in the wrong direction. So it is part of that training. Basically, at this point, they realized the photos on their website were completely terrible, and they did nothing to sell the idea. So what they did is they posed as photographers and went round to all the hosts, like they spent time traveling around and retook all the pictures and reposted them. As we say, that's not scalable. They can't continue to do this, but it is something that helped get everything over the line. They doubled their income with this action. So they went from $200 to $400 a day. And then singer Barry Manilow rented one of their apartments. And so this kind of buzz and growth is what took them to gain $600,000 in seed funding in April 2009. And with this sort of learning of things that you don't need to have things to be scalable immediately, they did consider this as they continued to grow. Jebbia also had an experience of working in the medical field. And he said that if they were working on a medical device, they would talk to doctors and nurses and patients and everyone involved in using the machine to get feedback, like market research, So they took that in stride. Silicon Valley, there can be a lot of things that they develop in isolation, just behind a computer.
Bubble.
Yeah. So they took that idea. And so everyone who starts work with Airbnb takes a trip in their first week of employment. And they also have new designs come in and offer a new idea immediately. So there's like an interesting anecdote of a designer who just started and he's like, I've cracked the code on he was given sort of a little assignment. He's like, I've cracked the code to use hearts instead of stars to save Airbnbs you liked while you were looking. And apparently it made a significant increase in the use of the feature, just changing star to heart. So as we know, they did go from strength to strength. There are a few hiccups with a few news articles about how they're impacting the hotel and real estate market, but generally they were just going up and up, just absolutely killing it. Then, Dale, what happened? Everyone knows what happened. I'll give you a hint.
2020?
2020, yes.
Yeah, 2020 happened.
Yeah.
So they were meant to list in 2020.
Correct.
And
they did list in 2020, but we'll get to that. So COVID. And yeah, right before their IPO, they were getting ready to launch and bam, bookings dropped over 70% and its valuation was cut in half. It wasn't great for their business model. But they did.
No, and most of the travel and accommodation worldwide really suffered. We look at things like airlines and whatnot. They bled during that period of time.
100%. But they did all the things that all the books say you should do in a crisis. They acted quickly with new information. They went back to their roots and they communicated clearly and effectively throughout all. It is reported that Airbnb built up cash reserves of over $3 billion from booking fees from guests and hosts. And thank God they did, because they were going to need to tap into that to recover. So they immediately cut back on all the extraneous passion projects. They slashed executive wages and they returned money to those whose trips were cancelled. And this returning of the money in the first instance caused host outrage, because the hosts thought that they were going to lose all this money. But then Chesky released a statement that said the company would cover 25% of the cancellations for hosts from March till May, which added up to $250 million. And because some people literally made Airbnb their full income, the highest earning Airbnb landlord had 881 properties in London and made a revenue of £11.9 million in 1 year.
That's crazy. There's entire industries that are spun up around Airbnb in terms of supporting them and concierge-based models, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's pretty incredible the influence it's had on the accommodation area.
100%. I mean, you have a bit of a hard time feeling sorry for this guy, like £11.9 million.
The poor landlord with 800 properties, my
Yeah.
heart bleeds for him.
Yeah.
Like, is he okay?
Yeah, exactly. But there are some people who lost some good income there. But Chesky sent an email to all the hosts and said, although it may not have felt like it, we are partners. When your business suffers, our business suffers. We know that right now many of you are struggling and what you need are actions from us to help, not just words. So it was really great for them. They recognized their major stakeholders in this way, even though they're not technically employees, right? And they don't owe them anything technically. But it was interesting.
They're using a service.
They're
like,
using
in the
the
same way.
service. And it's interesting to think about what they may or may not owe people for creating businesses around their business. I think, like you said, what do they owe that community of people? I'm not sure.
The person who might drop the keys off to one of the landlord's 800 or so properties, etc.
While in lockdown, they also made their time count. They created online experiences for people during the time, which is sort of like, okay, I guess. But they also knew the world would reopen and they looked to poise themselves to be ready when it did. So they put together what they called the Global Resource Hub, which is a place for hosts to get insight into the market. So data is a massive strength for Airbnb. They compiled it meaningfully to send advice, such as what the customers might be looking for when we reopen, what small things to provide for increased customer satisfaction, and sort of where to focus in terms of their customer segments in their areas. They finally released their IPO in December of 2020, which is a wild time to do for a travel and hospitality business in the middle of a pandemic. They were predicted to sell at $68 a share, and they ended up selling for $146 a share.
Yeah, they've gone gangbusters. They've done well.
So, that's what they did. That was their IPO. So it went for $146. Amazing. In the middle of a pandemic. And you have to wonder what kind of faith the market had in them at that time. It was really interesting. I mean, it's currently at $132. This entire year, it's sort of been gradually on the rise. So they're recovering after a drop and they look quite healthy.
And if you look at stock value, a lot of it's based on future value. And if we cast back to, or at least in Australia, and perhaps I'm putting quite an Australian lens on this, there was a lot of COVID optimism around that period. These numbers seem to be on the decline. I know a lot of other countries were entering winter and a bit more of a heavy period, and we all know how 2021 panned out. But I can imagine there'd be a bit of faith in, the world's going to reopen. And
yes.
It did. Like, look at it now. So I can imagine, I can see why the stock price had that positive growth in that space.
There was a lot of businesses, especially in the hospitality and travel industries at that time, that people didn't have as positive an outlook, and they literally went bankrupt. So they still did a remarkable job of navigating tense challenge. And now they face a sort of new challenge, and I think it'll be interesting to watch them navigate it. So short-term rental is in decline because it's way too expensive with inflation the way it is. And in high tourist locations like the Gold Coast in Australia, we are seeing sort of like a housing crisis because of these short-term rentals, because they're too expensive. So they sit empty while homelessness is on the rise. The Australian Bureau of Statistics estimates 1 in 10 properties are empty on the Gold Coast. So
crazy.
Yeah, insane. So people are sort of calling for more stringent short-term rental legislation to avoid crises like this. And publicly, Airbnb has shown its support for this. And knowing what we know about them as a company, so I'm sure they will pivot with whatever legislation changes there are. But, do they need to do more? Should they be assisting with their collected data to inform policies in the areas that they operate? Or where does their corporate responsibility sort of begin and end? But let's take a look at this and maybe dive into what we think the reason behind their success might be after the break. What do you reckon?
Sounds good. A short-term stay in a break. See you soon.
All right. All right, Dale, we're back. So sometimes with success stories, I think it's quite easy to get caught up in all the drama of it and think these guys were down on their luck and they turned it around. And, if you're a business owner, you might think, I'm just one more decision away from success. I think these guys approached it really strategically. They weren't just sort of randomly trying the next thing.
Can I call out there, though?
Yeah.
Cereal boxes.
I agree. I know what you're saying, but I think that it was a conscious decision just to raise some capital. I don't think they ever meant for that to be a long term. We've got to raise some capital
we
right
need
now.
money. We need to eat, and
Yeah.
we need some money to put
Yeah.
in. We need to
So-
pay the bills.
and keep this business idea alive so before it dies. So let's do this. So I still think that was a strategic decision on their part.
And interesting note, which I'll add,
Yeah.
is that so in the Y Combinator interview that they had with Paul Graham, so it's a ruthlessly quite a difficult interview. You're not allowed to present anything, not prepare anything. You just sit down and they just grill you for 10 minutes.
Oh my God.
A lot of the rhetoric behind it is they're not really interested in the business per se. Like they'll look at that, but they're very much interested in the founder and or the group collection of founders as it was in this instance. As they left, they didn't think they did too well in that space. And as they leave, they gave boxes of cereal, so the Obama Rose and
Captain McCain's.
they gave them to Paul Graham and was like, here you go. And he was like, wait, what are you talking about? Like, what is this? And apparently on the phone call that they got to be successful into Y Combinator, they were like, actually the cereal is what kind of saved us. Like that was something that was like, you guys aren't giving up. Like you guys are cockroaches. You're going to keep going.
Yeah.
I'm not saying every business should invest in a cereal if they're struggling. However,
but it was an innovative way for them to keep going when they were
correct.
like, we've hit a brick wall. We still believe in this business. Let's keep going. I think you also raised an interesting point about the Y Combinator looking at founders, because I did have a question for you because do we think Airbnb would still be this successful once the founders leave? Or do you think that because they're still there and they're still driving and they're still navigating these treacherous waters. So do you think it's them driving the business that's keeping it alive? Do you think Airbnb could be at risk when the founders go?
I think their response to COVID tells me that they would struggle without the founders.
Yes.
Because I think that care in the community is something that's a little bit founder first. And it's excellent. I'm not saying anything wrong with that. And it's probably something to people to watch out for in terms of am I doing the best for the business or am I doing the best for me? And we see this with a lot of other big successful companies. I'll hang our good friend, he's not a friend, but Elon Musk out to dry for a little bit. Elon Musk is not a friend of mine. You're an interesting fella. But I wonder if SpaceX and Tesla would be what they are today without an individual like him. And I think because he has made it so much of his brand and that brand. I don't think Airbnb is at the same level. Like the names you mentioned, they're not household names I'm aware of. So the brand has transcended them. But I think some of the underlying operational elements is what I'm quite like, ooh, yeah, this is their business, this is their company.
Yeah.
And I imagine they're working on succession planning, but there's some work to go on there.
Well, and unless they have someone that keeps that culture that they've set up and as passionate and cares for the business as much and is able to latch onto that design thinking that they have.
Exactly.
They would have really struggled to navigate. Like that could have easily toppled over and, you know, with press about invading communities and all that kind of stuff without people at the helm that were really, really cared about the success of the business and the people involved in the business. Yeah, I don't know how well they would have done.
You touched on design thinking there, and actually I think that's Airbnb's lovely, beautiful product differentiator. Airbnb is a beautiful app experience to use, and that example you gave before around changing from a star to a love heart seems inconsequential, but is a really interesting component. But on the topic of design, something they really did during the COVID period was change how the ratings page on their app was shown. So they elevated things like cleanliness in that space to give that psychological safety around what they were taking seriously. So previously it was how's the check-in experience, how's the communication, how's location, how's the value, which they changed to location, and then cleanliness was upfront, which is something that really shows from a design perspective the value that they're placing in that entire experience, which I really, really like.
The other thing they did in that area as well, they gave like badges to hosts who went through like a training for cleanliness and then like a certain cleaning protocol. So if it was really important to people that the cleanliness was up the top, then that they had like a little badge that said, yep, I am a clean host and I've done the COVID cleaning training or whatever it is, and I follow that protocol. So it really helped people with safety and like feeling good about booking a holiday again.
It provided value to the people who are using it, the people who are listing their properties, so the
Yeah.
homeowners who are saying, this is where you put your copy around what you've done for cleaning, this is what you've done around the fees that are associated to that, etc., etc. So again, that design component is just really embedded in everything they do, and I think it goes towards a overall beautiful product. I think they're an excellent case study for that. Airbnb has contributed so much to the design community, and they have such a conscious effort to that. So they're not just talking the talk about design, they actually contributed back to that community. And if you've used the Airbnb app, you understand how beautiful it is. And if you use their website, it's an excellent experience. I think that comment you made around those amazing photos that they take, there's a lot of times you're staying in Airbnb, it's like, oh yes, that does look so rustic, so nice. It's a lovely place I want to stay in. I will accuse them of contributing to this horrible thing that when you are trying to find a recipe for like cooking frozen salmon, and it's buried down the bottom, and you have to go through 17 pages of scroll about this woman's joy of the fact that her first time she tried frozen salmon, she was on the island. It's like, no, just give me the recipe. And I think Airbnb didn't cause it, but they definitely didn't stop contributing to it. But those pages and those blog entries are so beautiful. And anyone who is into design, I highly recommend reaching out to the Airbnb design website. Some of their stuff is just lovely to look for. But it goes back to the fact that they've just created a beautiful product that is fun to be at, which is a key differentiator to your general hotel experience, which any hotel website that you've tried to engage with, they're a pain. Like, I don't really care about your conference room.
exists.
Exactly. That's a great differentiator for them and something they should really capitalize on and continue to, because it's a lovely product.
And what do you think about them being able to maintain that early startup success culture, being super agile and being able to rethink of ideas when the pandemic hit and pivot and all that sort of stuff? I think that contributes to their success monumentally, but I don't think it's always the right thing for businesses to do either. It seems like they were always preparing for this rainy day. Like, they had that $3 billion put aside, like, ready.
Yeah.
Like, they were smart.
Something else.
They were smart.
And haven't we seen this before with so many companies that have gone to IPO and they've had to change who they are as a company? The expectations of them have changed phenomenally, and so they're going, oh, well, now we have to do this. We have to show value to our shareholders, and we have to constantly spin up new ideas, etc., etc. And so maybe that's why it was there. But I think it does show some really conscious planning by those original founders and the team to go, listen, we're going through a massive growth period, a massive change period, which becoming a public company is. There's obviously some excellent things in that. All the people who have shares in that company have tangible value, which is great. But it makes me think that, again, I'm interested around if these three leave the company, or any version of them leave the company, what Airbnb looks like. Will they still have that same success, or will they just be an excellent lifestyle company?
And what do you think about, there's a bunch of these kinds of businesses in the tech world where people have set up businesses around a major platform. I used to work for a place where we would help customers of Shopify. Our niche offering was creating connectors between Shopify and other platforms and like helping them speak to each other. It's like
user media entertainments who build their entire platform off the Facebook algorithm. And so there is entire businesses or blogs who are built off Facebook.
Yeah.
And there might be excellent revenue coming in, but then Facebook decides, actually, we're not prioritizing anymore. We're actually prioritizing photos from your mum, not from this. And that all of a sudden that business is crippled overnight.
Yeah.
And gone.
But do you think Airbnb, because Airbnb obviously haven't done that, they're a standalone company, but they have all of these people that.
But what's the change them bringing on? What if they all of a sudden decided to buy up a whole bunch of real estate and offered a competing product, and then also, or they offered a product in which, okay, the person who you can call up, who sends you the message and drops you the keys to get into the property when you go for it as a customer, when you use an Airbnb product. What if we sell that back to the person as a service? So there'll be an Airbnb official concierge who'll go in and operate that, which I think they haven't. And I think the message from the founder sounds around understanding the relationship he has with the community. And to be honest, they haven't shown any interest to buy up huge amounts of real estate. And I think they have a good tension in that they need the people who are contributing the houses and the Airbnbs at this product and the stock as much as those need the platform to do it. And at any point, like end of the day, the person with 800 or so properties could choose to sell up and just put them back on the market and sit on a giant pile of cash and invest in something else and buy something like a lovely ETF.
881 properties in London.
That's
It's
a
like one
headache.
of the wealthiest cities in the world.
And I keep going to the concierge model. I should use the cleaning model as well. Like there's entire cleaning companies that are built around servicing Airbnb and what that's offering.
But I think you're right. I think their success is dependent on these people. So it probably is within their interest to sustain this community of service that they've set up.
I think we underestimate as well the amount of, particularly in an American environment, the amount of impact these tech companies have on policy. They're putting millions of dollars into lobbyists who are sitting there in Washington, and I'm unsure about it from an Australian point of view. Obviously, we're a much smaller fish in this space, but they're in there influencing policy and they're paying it to do that. And so publicly facing, there may be a lot of, you see this a lot from some of the other social media companies, publicly facing like, yeah, geez, it is horrible this is happening. But in the same way, they've got lobbyists who are there going, well, this is what we need to be able to do. This is how we need to influence this, and we'll donate money to your cause for that purpose. So there is a real interesting space around what value they have, what value they bring, and the kind of say they have in that space. I look at Melbourne recently. Melbourne has just released a 7% or announced a 7% tax on short-term rentals. And they're quite honest, it's going to pass on the consumer. So all of a sudden, when you book a Airbnb in Melbourne, it's going to cost 7% extra just because of the tax that they paid in. So I think it does go it's quite high. And a lot of the other states in Australia are like, I think we should probably follow state. And so you can probably see it going some way. I don't know about it happening in other spaces, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
But I do think Airbnb's prices have been consistent. Like I remember when Airbnb was the cheap option. Like it was the cheap option. When you were traveling, you were like, oh yeah, cool, I'll go stay on someone's couch and it'll be cheap. These days, it's really not. If not the exact same price as a hotel, more expensive. So
and I think that's where they're going to be going in future. There's going to be a differentiator for them around being different to a hotel chain. I personally, based on the fact of the price, I stopped booking Airbnbs for a while, and then I was like, you know what? It's actually really nice having to not worry about it. And the amount of rules you would get in an Airbnb space, because don't you dare make a noise after 10 o'clock and make sure you put your bins out.
Do the dishes. And I'm like, no, I'm on holiday. Go away.
Yeah, so it was a real different experience. And I was like, I actually prefer just dropping my bags off and having the amenities around that space. And so I think that's where Airbnb, it's great that there's a differentiator and there's options. It's excellent for the consumer. But still, I think there's, as they continue to grow and change and the general accommodation, short-term stay accommodation space changes, it's an interesting one to watch.
Well, my best friend's booked an Airbnb for us for her wedding, which is... That's the kind of thing where you can't do hotel. Like there was a bunch of us, all the bridal party, we're getting ready in the morning and like doing that kind of stuff. That's the kind of time where you actually do need to rent a house, and so it definitely still has its times where it's the best option.
It's got its spot in the market. So Airbnb, if you want advice, just that succession planning is probably something to work on, and everything else.
Dale, are you available? Should I give them your number?
Done. Sorted. I'm really good at cereal. Well, listeners, there you have it. You now understand a little bit more of the con. We hope that you have avoided only getting to 999 true fans and not the 1,000 you need to be successful in the future. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Big Con podcast. It not only supports us, but means you will get all the latest episodes straight to your device. Do not keep all the fun to yourself. Share the con around to your mother, your aunt, your best friend's brother. Tell them to check us out on all their favorite podcast apps, and I mean every one of them. Every single one. We should be there, and if we're not, let us know. We'll get you there. Any further details, please head over to our website, thebigconsultingagency.com, and sign up to the mailing list. Bye for now. Thank you, everyone. That was fun.
Thanks, Dale.
This podcast was recorded on the lands of the We're Wrong language group. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.